Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. Glad to have you guys here with us to discuss something a little bit different outside of Wi-Fi, but somewhat related. But before we start, we have our co-host here, Francois. How are you doing, Francois?
I'm very good. Hi, Roel. How are you?
I'm doing well. Just hanging in there. Early morning here, but I got my cup of coffee.
Awesome. I'm out of coffee this morning, so I had to go with tea.
That's right. We were talking about this, and I was saying you've got a major crisis going on here because you have no coffee. But you know, tea is a good second best. That's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, I will survive.
You will survive, and hopefully we can survive through this episode because we're gonna talk about something a little bit out of our scope because you and I both are trying this, and it's something about programmability, coding, and relating all to the Cisco DevNet Associate. And you guys must be wondering, why are we talking about this? And it's because the network engineer is changing a little. Right now, there's some new skill sets that we are able to acquire and apply it to our day-to-day. And so you must have heard the last couple of years that the network engineer should learn how to code because that's what we're doing now, I guess, right? To help automate our network and to help work with APIs with everything that we do. And so the role of a network engineer really is changing a little. It's not going to change, overnight, and it's not going to change because coding is not going to take over. I mean, there's going to be people who just need to know network engineering. I just think that coding itself can be an advantage to certain individuals. So we're going to talk about why it's important and how we could use it. What do you think, Francois?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's as a network engineer, we're especially if you're day in and out in the operation of the network and trying to see if everything is up and running, doing some troubleshooting, configuring some new equipment. I think that's when programming will help you a lot because every vendor now introduced their API. You can now configure the equipment using program scripts. And if you used to configure a lot of equipment, if you used to do a lot of CLI or even a lot of GUI to validate the network, I think that's going to help you a lot because you'll be able to streamline your process. Maybe you'll be able to do some of the work faster and focus on improving your network, focus on the architecture and stuff like that. So I think that's when programming will be very helpful. Also, if you do troubleshooting, you could create your own tools, your own dashboards, your own little script that you could run to get an idea of what's going on. It's going to be even more relevant as we go because, like I said, every vendor is coming out with their own API and a way to do it. And Cisco, by introducing their new certification program there, I guess it's a good platform to learn about programming in general. If you've been doing network all your life and you don't really know what it is and you have no idea what API is, a Yang model or Python, I guess it's a good way to get introduced to all of these vocabulary and all of these topics. Even if it's a little bit Cisco centric, it's some of the topics are very general, and you could be reusing somewhere else if you want to work with other equipment, or if you just want to develop your independent scripts and programs.
Yeah, exactly, and it, like Francois said, this episode may be a little bit more Cisco-centric because we'll talk about the DevNet Associate, but we can apply this with other technologies and other platforms. So to get started here, we just want to talk about how this can be a benefit for you, how you can create more efficiency in your job and what you do day to day. and what those advantages are. And so back in at Cisco Live 2019, that's when the Cisco DevNet certification was announced, and it's centered around the programmability of the network. And so they have this ongoing theme for the last 3 years about network intent and building a network that works for you. And a lot of that had to do with programming things into the network and having programmability. And so this year in 2019, I actually made it a goal to teach myself Python, and it's been going pretty slow. I was on and off for the beginning of the year, and now we're in November, and it was like late October last month when I really started to pick it up again. And so when I was looking at Python, I was going, well, I need to try to apply this to my day-to-day. Like I need something to associate this with and help me see what relevant topics to help me learn this a little bit better. And so I started looking at the DevNet Associate because I do work with a lot of Cisco equipment, and I wanted to take what I learned and try to apply it there. And so that's when I gave myself this challenge to take the DevNet Associate exam and pass it in February 2020. So we're talking, it's November 2019 now. And I believe I still have a lot to do, a lot of things to go over, but I am documenting my own challenge. So if you go to my blog, roeldionisio.com/DevNet Associate, I started documenting the things that I am learning that ties back to the exam topics. And so we'll link out to also the exam topics because they lay it out pretty nicely there and what you need to learn. And they also link out to some resources because currently there's no study material for the exam. But primarily what I'm trying to do is learn. I'm leveraging the DevNet Associate to learn Python and scripting in order to use it with the network equipment that I use. So that's kind of why I'm going for the DevNet Associate. I just felt it was really relevant for me in learning Python.
It's a good start. Yeah. See, one thing is, one question we get sometimes is, for anyone that wants to learn Python and wants to learn it in a way that they can start applying to their work. Sometimes you have a lot of resources out there, right? Like which book do you read? Which website do you go to? And how do you get started? How do you install Python on your computer and all of these questions? I think that the DevNet Associate program is really good for that, especially if you're into networking, because on their website they actually have some labs you can follow, and it's like a step-by-step labs. And the first labs, it's like how to let me get the real phrasing, setting up your Windows workstation as a development environment, and then they tell you what tool to install, how to get Python installed, which program do you need to actually do the coding, and they guide you through the process, explaining you how it works. And I think it's a good way to get started, especially if you, like I said, if you want to do programming related to networking.
Yeah, exactly. These labs that Cisco provided are these little sandboxes that you can apply the actual steps to performing this on their labs. So you don't have to do it on your machine, or you don't have to build your own lab. You can do everything in their virtual labs, and it works very well. And I was learning that way because you actually get to you get to log into an actual router and perform some programmability there and see what the output is, right? Because sometimes if you have a lab, you have a router and a switch, you might not have a lot of things connected to it, or you might not be running certain services. And so one of the examples for wireless people is you could log into Cisco CMX, for example. They already have a ton of APs connected to that with a lot of clients. And so you just run certain scripts, you build it out through the lab, and then you get the output of everything you need. And it's the same thing with doing a Meraki lab. Meraki has a huge sandbox where this is the sandbox that they use to show their, it's part of their sales and training. And you're able to query the Meraki sandbox and even build things on their Meraki sandbox. And so that's a great way to even learn some of the basics as well. And so maybe the first question we should really answer is, must you learn how to code? Is it an absolute requirement? What do you think, Francois?
I would say it depends on your job. So it might not be a requirement, but might be like a nice to have skills, especially if you're a network engineer. If you're a network engineer, I would say yes. If your job is more like a team lead architect, maybe not, right? Maybe you just work on the network architecture, and you don't really, need it at that point. You could have people in your team with the skills. So I guess it would depend on what you do, right? Depend on what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly. So not everyone is going to need to learn how to code. Not everyone needs a DevNet Associate. Like Francois said, it really depends on what you do and maybe where you want to be. So if you're looking at the DevNet Associate and you want to learn how to code, you really want to learn how to do automation, but you're not in that role yet, this would be a good place to start to get some of that foundation and learn some of the basics. And then you could use that to build your resume to get maybe into a role that applies this.
Also, you have to ask yourself the questions, do I want to do it, right? Look at the benefits of what it could bring to your job and really decide if you want to do it. If you do stuff that you don't want to do, you're never going to, fully commit and do it well. So I always, when I'm about to do something, I always like to ask myself, do I really want to do it? And then is it going to be fun? And then if the answer is yes to the both question, you're going to have a good experience to it. My background with programming was a little bit different because I actually learned how to program at school, but I decided to move away from it because I didn't like it that much. I prefer networking, so I moved away from programming to do my master in networking. And now, it's like programming is running behind me, catching back and coming back to me. But now that I have a different vision now because I see how I can apply that skill to my job. And now it makes it more interesting to me, right? Yeah. I'm like, okay, I could do this with that. I could do this. I have some use cases that comes to my head, and then you can apply it to your day job. And then all of a sudden programming becomes fun.
Yeah, and exactly. So, and it's because of that relevancy, right? Because you at the time, didn't see how it tied to what you were doing or what you wanted to do. But for me, it hasn't been, actually Cisco Live, the 2019 and was it San Diego? That was where I really saw the possibilities. Remember when you and I were in that Cisco Champion tour inside Cisco World of Solutions, where they kind of gave us a behind the scenes of how they monitor the network for the whole conference. I thought that was a really interesting way to apply coding and Python to build dashboards so you can monitor very specific parts of the network that matter to you as in your role. And I think it was the SNMP guy who was going over his scripts and the different things he built out. And I thought that was really insightful. And because a lot of the dashboards that we have today, they don't really provide you with the info you want, right? And then you kind of have to ask for that to those developers, and then you wait. And then you even have to wait to see if they even care about implementing that because it's time and resources for them. But nowadays with API and SNMP and all the things that you can tie together with Python or any other programming language, you can then just build your own dashboards for that, right? And so now it's become an advantage for you to become better at doing the day-to-day operations and monitoring. Yeah. And then it even gets you it makes you really understand networking also. And so if you're trying to build maybe some dashboards for your wireless network, maybe you wanted to see all your APs and how many clients per AP, you would really have to understand the wireless infrastructure in order to do that, right? And so if you go back to that question, must I learn how to code? For me, the answer is no. You don't have to. And if you're going to be in an environment where monitoring, you have to monitor a lot of devices, or you want to automate something. Maybe you're a consultant like Francois, and you need to configure a lot of devices, really quickly. That would be a good way to pick up Python, learn how to code, and automate that process. So you're actually only there for maybe 10 minutes because you started your script and you waited, and then everything's good, rather than spending a couple of hours there. So that's why we're talking about efficiencies and how to use this to your advantage. And I mean, we're no experts by any means, but we're still learning. And so in this podcast, we're talking about our experience when it comes to even just getting started with this.
And also, like, if you, developers, what I've learned at school, developers are very lazy. So that's what they used to say. We're lazy. If we have to do a task twice, we'll automate
it. Yeah.
Well, they'll create a program for it. So, and as network engineer, we're not really like that, right? If we have something to do, to repeat, we'll just repeat it, right? If we have 2 or 3 switches to configure, we'll just configure the 3 switches and get over it, right?
Right.
So what you can try to see if you're not really too sure if you should learn how to code and you don't know if it's going to improve your work, what you can do is you could try to list everything you do in one day, and then try to see where you have some where you could gain some efficiency, right? If some of the actions are listed 3-4 times during the day during the week because you have to do them all over and over again, maybe you can create a script that will do that for you, right? Maybe in the morning there's some specific things you do in the morning when you arrive to work. Maybe those steps could be automated, and all you get is an email when you get to work. It says, okay, everything is done and worked properly, right? So try to do that. Try to list all of the things you do in 1 week and try to see where you could potentially optimize your workflow, and then you're going to save time. And then all the time you save, you can use it to learn how to program, I guess, in the beginning. And then after that, you could use it to do different things, to create different tools, to make your network better, or even get some project done faster.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about really looking for where you can make your process efficient. And installations is one of them, right? Your provisioning of devices is usually the same task every time you do it. And so when you're deploying hundreds of access points, you can automate that process, with some scripting and Python, and be able to just run a script, and you don't have to sit there and manually provision every single access point, put them in the right groups and right controllers. Maybe you can just automate that process, right? Change the name, those kinds of things. Like, you can just automate that process. And I think some of us, like, if you're like me, it's hard to grasp that concept because I don't have a background in networking. My background is actually in systems administration. Like, I came from the Windows world of things. And so learning how to automate and provision a network with minimal human interaction. I mean, there's going to be human interaction at some point in any of these processes, right? But all we're trying to do is make it efficient. So instead of me spending an hour or 2 provisioning access points, maybe I can cut that down to about 10 minutes. And then I have time to do other things, right? And maybe if you're a consultant, that would mean getting so much time back, right? And maybe that means you making more money for your business, because if it only takes you, less than half an hour to provision a network, you can move on to the next client because now you're done, rather than having to spend your time there for half a day, for example.
And also you can charge less for your services, so you can be more competitive.
I guess you can do that, yeah.
It depends. Depends how greedy you are.
That's a different story, I think, because you and I were talking about like the business of things, and I think we can definitely like have a long conversation of how this could apply to a business. And there are businesses already doing this, right? There's a lot of partners that are applying this, and we had an episode with Jake Snyder. Remember, we talked about his experience and the programmability. And one thing before I forget, if we want to talk about resources, WLPC put out a survey for the Phoenix 2020 WLPC, and one of the deep dives there was it a deep dive or I can't remember. It's either a deep dive or one of the boot camps where it's Jake Snyder and Ryan Adsima that they'll teach you coding to help automate your network. Like those two guys, I couldn't think of anyone better to teach. Like, I don't think I'll be able to attend, but I wish I could attend their course.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's one of the boot camp. I saw it yesterday as well.
Yeah, I actually, I didn't vote on it since I'm not going, but I looked at the topics and I was like, man, that would be a good one to learn because you can apply that directly to Wi-Fi, right? And so in this episode, we're kind of talking a little bit beyond Wi-Fi because a lot of this would also apply to infrastructure because you're probably going to be deploying switches, right? And if you're like me, a network engineer, if you're deploying a switch, you usually have a template. And you just do the copy and paste, you replace some of the text so it's unique to that device and the IP address. But you can automate that process, right? You can automate the deployment of switches pretty easily. And with today's iOS being that there's plug and play functionality on these switches, you would be able to automate that easily. And so the DevNet labs, they have labs like that you could work with. And so all that we've have just described is the reasons why you may want to go for the DevNet Associate. I know that's one of the reasons I want to do it because I do more than wireless. I also do the switching side of things. And I also do a lot of monitoring of the wireless network. So it'd be very advantageous for me to learn about the DevNet Associate so I can apply it to my day-to-day. And so what are some other examples that a wireless expert or someone who focuses on wireless can apply this? Francois, we went to WLPC Prague and we attended a deep dive from Mike Albano, and he has excellent examples of why you should learn how to code with Python because he's automated a lot of his wireless processes, right?
Deployments. Yeah, it's impressive.
From things like surveys, the way they do surveys. And I'll tell you how he does. He uses Google Slides as part of his survey. And then you're wondering, but Google Slides is like a presentation software, right? But they also
you could do the same thing with an AKR project file. You could parse the AKR project files, retrieve the AP name, retrieve the channel, retrieve the transmit power, and then you could create a script to pretty much pre-configure the APs or provision the APs or even configure them all the way, depending on what system you have, if you have control or not. And then you can have, one script that just takes the AKR project as an input and then gives you the configuration file as an output.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what they do, but because they have different vendors, they use open config, which allow them to use one code to configure different type of AP from different vendors.
And he takes it one step further. Excuse me. And if you take his coding examples, he's using Google Slides to get that configuration because for some reason that's where the APs are. They have all their settings and takes that code from Google Slides using an API to then use OpenConfig to apply that configuration. So he's got this end-to-end thing and he even uses a script to validate the AP installation. So he knows if, let's say if AP1 was installed near AP2, but it looks like AP2 might be from across the room, for example, based on RSSI. And AP9 for some reason seems to be like at -30 or something close. Then he knows with his script that someone installed the wrong AP in that location. Like it was really interesting how he described how they've automated that process, and the only human input, what was it? The installers, and also the input of I think the MAC addresses or serial numbers of the APs.
Yeah, I forgot they had one manual step. I forgot.
But it's like one or two human interventions there into that process, and everything else is automated, which I thought was really crazy. This thinking about how we do surveys now, we're only talking about a little step, which is parsing out the Ekahau file, getting your channel and transmit power plan, and putting that into a config file.
Yeah, you could just doing this could be saving a lot of time already.
Yeah, it's the deployment and how quickly they can deploy, because Mike works in a very I think high growth environment is what we'll call it.
Yeah.
So they're always deploying access points, and they want to use multi-vendor because they have different use cases for different vendors. And then he's using Python encoding to eliminate some errors, so he doesn't have to physically go and look. He's kind of automated that process for him. And then it just kind of makes the network smarter, right? Because he's kind of tied all of their internal tools and APIs, leverages them to build all this out to scale. And so that's also important for the larger environments, is you want something that can scale, and automation and programmability is a way to help scale that out, so you can leverage those tools, those custom tools and dashboards and processes. That way you can work more efficiently.
Also, if you think about troubleshooting, what you could do is you could create dashboards, custom dashboards that helps you troubleshoot Wi-Fi networks, and then when you arrive on site, you could just launch the tool, connect to the local network, launch the tool, communicate with the different network equipment, the controller, the APs, and then start getting some data in your dashboard. And then you can maybe you can have some markers that gives you an idea of if the environment is good or bad, or gives you some idea of where to start doing your troubleshooting. Or you could have that dashboard running while you do like a site survey, for instance. And when you're done the site survey, you have both, data from the controller and data from site survey to start your troubleshooting steps. And I guess you can have more visibility into what you're looking for.
Yeah, I would say one of the ideas that I've been thinking about is how to add more detail to your survey, right? So we use your Ekahau Sidekick and the application to do your survey, but what if you also had a tool that you could bring with you that kind of also collected data from a client perspective, more of a client that the user has, and then kind of take different viewpoints to build a custom report? Because right now the Ekahau report only looks at the Ekahau data, but what if you could tie in other sources of data that was part of your survey and then build a more custom report outside of the Ekahau functionality?
That would be nice.
Yeah,
anything's possible.
Anything's possible. You just got to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other guys in the wireless industry that are really good at programmability. I mean, like I said, Jake Snyder and Ryan Adzema come to mind. There's other people that are in our Slack channel that are pretty good at developing scripts for their wireless network. And so
Josh
is really great. He gives us good examples of how he uses it, and you can just apply this with your network. So some of the resources, again, if you guys go over to cleardescend.net/195, you'll find links to the different resources that we're providing that we have used. One of them that I've used is Think Python 2, which you can download online as a PDF. That will give you an idea of learning Python 3. And I know it says Think Python. I think it's called Think Python 2. It's like the second version. And then there's also the DevNet labs, the DevNet labs are really good because then now you can apply that to maybe the same type of environment that you're in. They have some of the exam topics laid out and some of the labs that apply to those exam topics. And I've used those very successfully in just getting a basic understanding. And so you'll go into things like, what is REST and API? What is YAML? What is netconf? Because Francois, you were building scripts for the AirOS controllers, and then I shared with you with the 9800, the Catalyst 9800. I said, "Hey, look, I just enabled netconf, and now look at all the stuff I can query on the controller."
Yeah. So I guess one thing we could say is that it's going to get easier and easier for us to interact with the network equipments. Like netconf, like you said, makes it easier if you have AirOS controllers and you have to run a version that does not allow you to use netconf. I can't remember when they started to use it. It's probably 8 dot something, 8.8 or 8.9
with iOS XE.
Yeah, iOS XE, I think it's by default, but if you're using AirOS, I think you don't have, like if you have 8.5, you don't have netconf, right?
Yeah.
And so what you have to do instead of leveraging netconf to receive that structured data from the controller that you can easily parse, what you have to do is you have to send a comment. So you have to send like show AP summary, for instance, and then you're going to get the result as a text.
Yeah.
And then you have to parse the text and extract the data you need out of the text. And that when it's become way more complex. And also that's when it breaks easier, because if something changed in the text and you're not parsing it properly, then your script is going to fail.
Yeah.
So I started to work on different scripts to do that. It's a good way to learn for sure. If you don't want to know what a regex is or anything like that, you can learn a lot. But it's way more complex than using netconf and model, structured models. So if you're a little scared about programming, I think you should just stay with, using netconf and the future of network programmability. I'm surprised I was able to say that word. But if you want to be a little bit more adventurous and you want to do things with the equipment you have today, let's say you have AirOS 8.5, then you can start looking into how you can parse the output and how you can play with the text and see what you can do with it.
And if you're in an environment where you have Cisco Prime, you could probably leverage some of the APIs on Prime to get some of the information you want, but you're just querying Prime, which has access to everything else. And so that way, I mean, that's how they built some of the dashboards at Cisco Live, which I thought was really cool. And the one that stuck out to me the most was a dashboard that showed all the APs and the number of clients connected to that AP, and they would raise a flag if it reached a certain threshold.
Yeah. So they know which area is busy.
Yeah, exactly. And that was just one example. I'd have to dig through my notes because I was taking notes on that session that we were sitting in, because he outlined how he was taking in all that data and then how he was parsing through the data to build different dashboards. And I thought that was like going through that process is you have a different mindset when you're trying to build something. You got to think of every single process and how you're going to convert something to another format and then into a way that you could display it visually. Because right now in my little beginning stages of doing this DevNet Associate study, I'm only looking at text. I haven't looked at any kind of method of displaying this visually.
So what's the most challenging for you as you learn about programming?
It's a lot of like learning how to leverage Python, right? So, learning how to turn things into like a list or a dictionary in order for you to parse through things. And then when I come across something like XML, which I don't really work in XML, I have to learn how to parse XML in a method where we can use that within Python. So that means I have to look at libraries in order to do that. And then I try to understand how the libraries work. So I feel like I'm studying for something new altogether again, right? It was like when we picked up the Ada 211AX draft, you really had to understand things from scratch. I feel like I'm doing that again. It's a little bit easier, I think, because there's so many resources out there, but for me, it's just about like that mindset and thinking differently and trying to solve a problem. And it's probably there, and you can do it in a number of different ways, because you can build different scripts to do different. You can do it like 3 different ways in a script, basically. And so, which way is the most efficient way, and which way is the right way? I know for sure I'll be learning how to do things the wrong way in the beginning, but I think as I work with more people, maybe in our Slack group, or as we get more people who maybe want to join this like challenge with me to learn DevNet Associate, we can work together in figuring out how we can apply this to wireless and share some of our scripts to learn more efficiently.
Yeah.
So
again, with all the APIs we have available to date, you could even do a challenge with the Slack channel where you can use the Slack API and then you send a message in the Slack channel every time you complete a lab.
Yeah. I mean, that's a cool thing about this, right? Slack has its own API. You can tie that into maybe like the Meraki dashboard, for example, and write a script where if you run a command in Slack, it'll go get the output for you and display it in the Slack channel.
Yeah. So if you're interested to learn about programming and DevNet Associate and you don't know where to go first, we'll put the link in the descriptions where to go first, I guess. And then you'll see the exam topics. And then on the left, they have the exam topics. On the right, they have the study material. And the study material is pretty much all the labs you can follow to learn about the exam topics. So that's a good way to start. And I mean, you have enough to stay busy for a while.
Yeah. And it didn't take me too long to go through a number of things. And so I have my own resources that I've wrote out, and I try to apply it to my own lab. And so I'm using the 9800 as my example. And then sometimes I use the Meraki sandbox as well. So if you want to follow along that, I'll add a link in the show notes to what I've already written out if you want to see some examples.
Awesome.
All right. Well, if you guys have any questions, or maybe you can enhance our conversation here and provide some examples, go ahead and go to the show notes, cleartosend.net/195, and we would actually be very interested to hear more. But
yeah, if you have some example of how you were able to use programming to leverage your current job. I know Alan shared some dashboard he was using this week on Twitter. That was pretty cool. It looked like a simple dashboard, but I mean, if you're always looking at the same metrics and you have to go to 3 different dashboards on Cisco Prime, you could just create your own simple dashboard that just displays what you want to see and get rid of the rest. So, I mean, if you have some use cases like that you want to share with us, don't hesitate to add a comment in the show notes or send us a tweet on Twitter.
Yep. So we'll have future episodes on maybe something that we build. But other than that, that's our whole episode on the DevNet Associate. Hopefully you will join me in trying to get this study for the DevNet Associate, and I'll see us all get the certification next year. And we'll see you guys on a future episode. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.